Spencer Carmichael walked into Theodore Devereux's funeral with another woman on his arm, and he smiled at the mourners, as though he'd arrived at a gala. The woman beside him was 6 months pregnant and dressed in pale gray, her hand laced through his, her chin lifted like she'd been invited. He paused at the foot of the casket, the way a man pauses to admire a car he intends to buy. He did not look once at the woman in black standing 3 feet away, his wife, the daughter of the man in the box, because he believed he already knew everything there was to know about her. He believed she was the quiet one, the manageable one, the wife who'd sign whatever was put in front of her, the way she always had. What Spencer didn't know, what nobody in that cold stone church on King Street knew, except a silver-haired lawyer in the second pew and the widow's daughter herself, was that the will had already been read. The trust had already closed around itself, like ice over a lake in late November. The money he'd come to collect had never, for a single day of their 7-year marriage, been within his reach. He thought he was watching Sloane Devereux break. He was watching her finish. She had always been the quiet one. That was the word people reached for when they described her. Quiet, reserved, easy to overlook in a room. At dinner parties in Rosedale, she sat near the end of the table and listened, and the listening was so complete that people mistook it for shyness. She wore good clothes that didn't announce themselves. She drove a 5-year-old Subaru with a hairline crack in the windshield she kept meaning to fix. She worked 3 days a week, running a children's literacy program out of a community center in Scarborough. And on Thursdays, she sat with kids in the oncology ward at Sick Kids and read to them until their eyes closed. Nobody who knew Sloane as Spencer's wife had any idea she was the only heir to a fortune that, the last time anyone had bothered to total it, sat north of $340 million. Her father had built it slowly, over 40 years, in commercial real estate and private equity, through a tangle of holding companies and family trusts, so layered that his name never appeared on a single list of the wealthy in this country. Theodore Devereux believed that the moment you let people see your money, you handed them the script for how to treat you. He'd told his daughter that before she was old enough to understand it, and by the time she understood it, she'd already watched enough to know he was right. Her mother had died when Sloane was 9. Breast cancer, the aggressive kind, fast and merciless. Sloane spent the last weeks of it in a chair by the hospital bed, holding a hand that grew thinner every day. And somewhere in those weeks she learned the thing that would organize the rest of her life. That the people who survived loss were the ones who paid attention. So she paid attention. She watched how her father's partners behaved when they thought no one was looking. She watched how the parents of school friends changed, just slightly, when they learned the Devereux name. By the time she was 16, she could tell, almost on contact, the difference between someone who saw her and someone who saw a doorway to something. By 23, she was exhausted by it. She told her father she wanted to live without the weight of the name for a while. Not forever, just long enough to find out whether anyone could love her without the light of all that money shining behind her. Theodore understood. He'd wanted the same thing once, before he married her mother, who'd never asked him what anything cost. He helped his daughter build the quiet life. She kept the surname because Devereux was common enough in Ontario to pass unnoticed. She took a modest apartment on the Danforth, a job that paid just enough for rent and groceries, and a bank card connected to nothing but itself. The only thing she carried from the other life was a thin gold band that had been her mother's, worn on her right hand, engraved on the inside, with a date she never explained to anyone. Her father gave her one instruction, and he gave it the way he gave everything, once, plainly, and never again. The right person, he said, won't ever make you feel you owe them an apology for being still. The wrong one will always need you louder than you are. She carried that instruction into the bar on Ossington, where she met Spencer Carmichael, on a Friday night after a long week. She carried it through the 7 years that followed, and in the end, she carried it out the other side. Spencer was a vice president at a wealth management firm on Bay Street, the kind of handsome that took maintenance. Early gym sessions, tailored suits, a skincare routine he'd have died before admitting to. He spoke with great authority about markets he understood only at the surface. He dropped clients' names at dinner the way other men check their phones. He believed, sincerely, that success was a matter of looking and sounding successful, and that the substance would arrive on its own schedule once the appearance was in place. He met Sloane and ran the calculation men like Spencer always ran. She was lovely. She was calm. She didn't compete with him for the center of a room. She'd make his life run smoothly, while he took the credit for the smoothness. In his arithmetic, she was the perfect complement to the picture he was assembling of himself. A wife who'd enhance without overshadowing. She watched him for a year before she married him, the way she watched everyone. She tracked how he treated servers, how he behaved when a flight was canceled, how he talked about women who weren't in the room. The results were mixed but not damning. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't, then, dishonest. He was shallow in a way that Sloane, tired from years of detecting deeper deceptions, mistook for being easy to read. She married him in the second year, a small ceremony at a winery in Prince Edward County. She planned all of it. He contributed enthusiasm and a guest list made entirely of people he wanted to impress. Within 18 months, the marriage had settled into its true shape. She ran everything. The mortgage on the house in Rosedale, which Spencer believed they owned together, and which was in fact held by a numbered Ontario company inside her father's trust, was paid from an account she managed. The bills, the insurance, the property taxes, the cleaning service, the calendar, the groceries, his mother's birthday gift, each year chosen and wrapped by Sloane and signed from them both. Spencer managed nothing. He came home to a clean house and a hot meal, and a wife who asked about his day and listened to the answer, and never once thought to ask him to ask back. He lived inside the result of her work the way a guest lives inside a hotel, enjoying the service, never once picturing the people who made the beds. Her father came to the city every 6 weeks to see her. He drove himself in a 10-year-old Volvo. He wore a watch that had cost $200 in 1994 and kept perfect time. He sat at her kitchen table and drank coffee from a chipped mug and asked her careful, unhurried questions, and he did not like Spencer. He never said so outright. But Sloane knew her father's silences the way someone who grew up near water knows weather. By what's underneath, not what's on the surface. On one visit, 3 years into the marriage, while Spencer was downtown, Theodore stirred his coffee and said the thing his daughter would remember word for the rest of her life. "A man who never asks where the money goes," he said, "is either very trusting or very sure it'll always be there for him. The first kind is rare." He didn't look up. "Spencer has never once asked you how this house runs. That means he's certain it'll keep running for him whether he looks or not. And a man who stops looking at the person holding everything up, that's the man who goes looking somewhere else." She didn't answer. She filed it away. She kept running the house. She kept watching. 18 months later, her father's prediction arrived on a Monday morning while she was paying the credit card bill. A charge she didn't recognize. A restaurant on Ossington, dinner for two, $190, dated to a Thursday. Spencer had told her he was at a client dinner. She held the statement for 10 seconds. Then she set it down, finished paying the bill, made breakfast, and went to work. She didn't say a word to him. She started keeping a file. Over the next 6 weeks, she assembled it, with the patience of a woman whose father had built an empire on doing the homework, before anyone else thought it mattered. Restaurant charges, hotel charges in a city they both lived in. Gaps in his calendar. A phone he left charging on the nightstand that held. The one time she looked while the shower ran. A long thread of messages with a contact saved under a name that meant nothing. The woman was Camille Roux, a junior associate at a rival firm. 29. Lovely, confident in the way of someone who'd learned early that her looks were leverage and had never once hesitated to spend them. By the time Sloane finished documenting, the affair was nearly half a year old, and Camille was pregnant. She learned about the pregnancy from a receipt. A baby store on Roncesvalles, a small stack of newborn things, charged to Spencer's card, dated 3 days before their wedding anniversary, which he had forgotten. She sat in the Subaru in the community center parking lot, the engine ticking as it cooled, and she felt something shift. Not heartbreak, exactly. Something more structural than that. The slow, quiet groan of a load-bearing thing giving way under a weight it had carried too long without complaint. She called her father that night. "I know," he said, before she'd finished the first sentence. "How long have you known?" 6 weeks. My people flagged it during a review of the household accounts." She closed her eyes. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you needed to find it yourself. If I'd told you, you'd have spent a year doubting. Now you're holding the proof in your own hands. You know what you know, and you know what you have to do." "I don't, though," she said. "What do I do?" He was quiet for a while. When he spoke, his voice had the weight of a man who'd spent 4 decades keeping things away from people who didn't deserve them. "Nothing," he said. "You change nothing. You let him believe it's all exactly as it was. You make his dinner, and you sign his cards, and you let him think he's 3 moves ahead. And while he's busy thinking that, you let me put a wall around you, he won't even see until he walks into it. Men like Spencer always push further than they need to. They always think they're smarter than the rules. So we let him run, and we wait for the leash to catch. She hung up. She went inside. She made dinner and set the table, and asked Spencer about his day and laughed at the right moment, and she said nothing. About the receipt folded in her coat pocket, or the encrypted file on her laptop, or the call that had just set in motion something her husband could not have imagined in his most paranoid hour. For the next 14 months, her father built the wall. The trust was restructured. Assets that had been held in places where a clever lawyer might one day argue they'd been mingled were quietly moved into vehicles that required only Sloane's signature and no one else's. Titles were reviewed. Accounts were audited. Every thread connecting her hidden life to her married one was found and either cut clean or wrapped in so many layers of protection that a whole firm of lawyers would need months just to find the end of it. And he did one more thing. He told his lawyers to watch Spencer. Not to interfere, only to watch. What they watched was a man who, made bold by his wife's apparent blindness, began doing reckless things. Spencer moved money out of their joint savings into a personal brokerage account without telling her. He changed the beneficiary on a life insurance policy that had named them both, listing only himself. He started quietly consulting a divorce lawyer about how marital property was divided in Ontario. A lawyer he was sure Sloane knew nothing about. He was planning. He was positioning. He believed he was 3 moves ahead, and he had no idea the board belonged to someone else. They documented all of it. Every transfer, every altered form, every consultation. The file grew thick and exact. Then Theodore Devereux was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Stage 4, inoperable. The same ward, as it turned out, where his wife had died. Though not the same disease, which somehow made it worse. The cruelty of being called back to the same hallway by a different door. He had 4 months, give or take. He used every week of them. He finalized the trust. He met with Sloane 3 times. Long meetings. Each one passing along knowledge and authority that would come alive the moment he stopped breathing. He introduced her to Delphine Aubry, the estate lawyer who'd execute it all, and act as her counsel from then on. 54, silver-haired, with the particular calm of a woman who'd spent 2 decades winning cases other lawyers called unwinnable. He read the file on Spencer one final time and wrote a single line on the cover in his small, square hand. "He'll come for the money at the funeral. Let him come. The door's already locked." Theodore died on a Tuesday in October with the lake light coming gray through the hospital window. Sloane was beside him. She held his hand. She watched the monitor flatten. She breathed. Then she stood, smoothed her coat, and walked out to the hallway where Delphine Aubry was waiting with a briefcase and a face that gave away nothing. "It's done," Sloane said. "I know," Delphine said. "Everything's in place. He can't touch it. He just doesn't know that yet." "No," Sloane said. "He doesn't." She looked back at the room. She turned the gold band on her right hand once with her thumb, the way she did without noticing. "Let him come to the funeral," she said. "Let him bring her. Let him think it's his day." Delphine had practiced estate law for 22 years and had seen grief wear a great many faces. She had never seen it wear this one. Something steady and clear, almost still. "And then?" she asked. Sloane turned back to face her. "And then he finds out who he married." They buried her father on a Friday, the sky, the flat pewter of late autumn in this country. The kind of cold that gets into the wool of your coat and stays there. 200 people came. Old partners, foundation people, the quiet and serious men and women who'd known Theodore Devereux as a man of depth and discretion. Sloane stood near the casket in a plain black dress, taking condolences with a composure she'd been training since she was 9. Her face was pale. Her eyes were dry. She held a weight nobody in the room could see. Spencer arrived 40 minutes in. He was not alone. Camille Roux walked beside him in pale gray, the curve of her not quite hidden, her hand in his, her chin up, and she walked into the funeral of Sloane's father, as though she belonged there, as though the woman by the casket were already a thing of the past. The room felt it. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. That specific silence of a crowd absorbing a shock moved through the mourners like cold air through an open door. Sloane watched them come. She watched her husband walk toward her with his pregnant girlfriend on his arm, past the body of the man whose fortune he believed he was about to share in, and she felt something settle in her chest. Not anger, not even humiliation, recognition, the strange quiet of a woman, watching a thing she'd been told would happen exactly on schedule. Spencer stopped a few feet from her. He didn't let go of Camille's hand. "I'm so sorry about your dad, Sloane," he said, and underneath the sympathy in his voice, there was something else, something she'd known him long enough to hear. Satisfaction. The satisfaction of a man certain he was watching the last of his wife's power drain out of her in real time. She looked at him. She looked at Camille. She looked at their two hands joined. She looked back at her husband. "Thank you for coming," she said. Level, neutral, the voice of a woman ticking a box. And she turned to the next mourner and did not look at Spencer again for the rest of the service. He read it as defeat. He read the calm as numbness, the silence as proof that she was exactly what he'd always taken her to be: soft, passive, easy. He had no way of knowing he had just made the last great miscalculation of his life. In the 3 weeks after the funeral, Spencer accelerated, the way her father had said he would. He moved out of the Rosedale house and into Camille's condo on the lake. He didn't discuss it. He simply stopped coming home, and when Sloane texted to ask where he was, he answered with one sentence: "I think we both know this is over." He called his divorce lawyer that Monday and told him to start. He wanted the house. He wanted half of whatever Theodore had left behind. He wanted it fast and clean, and he was certain, with the easy confidence of a man who'd never once been told no by a woman he considered beneath him, that Sloane would simply agree. And he did the thing her father's lawyers had predicted, almost to the dollar. He reached into the joint account, the modest one she'd kept funded from her own salary, and moved $71,000 into his personal brokerage. He did it without telling her. He did it because he believed it was marital money, and therefore half his. He did it because he had no idea the account was watched, that the transfer logged the instant it cleared, and that pulling money out of jointly held accounts after he'd already retained a divorce lawyer was the kind of thing that would later make his own counsel close his eyes and breathe through his nose for a long moment. Sloane watched all of it. She watched from the house Spencer thought they shared, the one titled to a company he'd never heard of. She watched from the kitchen table, where she drank her coffee each morning and read the updates Delphine sent in locked emails. She watched with the patience of a woman who'd been taught that the most dangerous opponent is the one who lets you keep running until the line goes taut. She didn't call him. She didn't argue. She didn't cry where anyone could see. The silence was total, and it was deliberate, and it was the loudest thing Spencer Carmichael had ever managed not to hear. Delphine called on a Thursday. He moved money. How much? $71,000. Personal account. No authorization. Sloane closed her eyes and turned the gold band on her finger. "That's what my father said he'd do." "Your father was rarely wrong about people." "Is it enough?" "It's more than enough. With the changed beneficiary and the secret consultations, we have a clear pattern of someone moving and hiding property in anticipation of a separation. In this province that matters. When we sit down across from them, he won't be negotiating from any kind of strength. He'll be negotiating from a hole, and his own lawyer is going to tell him to take whatever we offer and say thank you." Sloane opened her eyes and looked out at the garden her father had helped her plant. The beds gone brown and dormant under the first hard frost. The roots were down deep, though. They'd hold through the winter. "Set the meeting," she said. It happened on a Tuesday in November, 6 weeks after the funeral, on the 14th floor of a glass tower downtown. Floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the gray harbor, a long table, leather chairs, the particular expensive hush of a room where large sums of money change hands. Spencer arrived first. He wore his best suit, and the tie Sloane had given him for their 5th anniversary, which he'd chosen on purpose, though he couldn't have said why. He brought his lawyer, a man named Gordon Pruitt, who handled high-asset divorces, and had assured Spencer more than once that this would be straightforward. Gordon Pruitt had not yet seen the folder in Delphine Aubry's briefcase. He had not yet learned that his client's wife was not a part-time literacy worker, making $51,000 a year. He was about to have a very difficult morning. Sloane came in at 9:15 in a black blazer over a white blouse, no jewelry but the thin gold band. Her hair was pulled back, her face gave away nothing. She looked exactly the way she'd always looked to Spencer, quiet, contained, easy to handle. Delphine came in behind her and set her briefcase on the table without a word. Spencer leaned back in his chair. "You look well, Sloane." She didn't answer. She sat down, folded her hands, and waited. Gordon Pruitt opened with practiced efficiency. The marriage had broken down. His client sought a fair division of the marital property, the family home, the joint accounts, and any inheritance his wife had received from the estate of the late Theodore Devereux. He landed on the last part with weight. as though it were the center of the whole thing, as though everything else were just decoration around it. Delphine listened without interrupting. When he finished, she opened her briefcase and laid a single folder on the table. Thank you, Mr. Pruitt. Before we discuss any division, I need to clear up a few facts about what's actually in this marriage. He nodded. Spencer shifted, just slightly. The house on Crescent Road, Delphine said. Mr. Carmichael believes it's jointly owned. It isn't. It's held by a numbered company inside the Devereux family trust, established the year before the marriage. His name has never appeared on the title, the mortgage, or any document attached to it. As far as the property is concerned, he has been a guest for 7 years. The room went very still. Spencer's expression didn't change right away. It took a few seconds to reach the part of him that handled threat. The joint account at the bank on Front Street, Delphine continued. Mr. Carmichael moved $71,000 out of it into his personal brokerage in late October, after he'd already retained Mr. Pruitt, which establishes intent. That's hiding property in anticipation of separation. We have the transfer, the timing, and the intent, all documented. Gordon Pruitt's pen stopped. He looked at his client. The life insurance policy, Delphine said, which named both spouses, was changed in September to name only Mr. Carmichael. His wife was not told. We have the original and the amended filing. She turned a page. And now the estate. She looked directly at Spencer, and there was no warmth in it at all. Mr. Carmichael appears to believe his wife received a modest inheritance subject to division. I need to correct that. She set a single page on the table. A summary. The Devereux Family Trust holds assets valued at approximately $340 million. Commercial real estate in 4 provinces, a private equity portfolio, and controlling stakes in 3 operating companies. The trust was established before the marriage. Its assets have never been mingled with marital funds. In this province, inheritance and trust property kept separate are excluded property. They are not on the table. They never were. The silence that followed had a texture to it. Gordon Pruitt stared at the page. His face ran through a fast sequence of calculations, none of which gave him a number he could use. Spencer stared at his wife. His mouth was slightly open. The confidence that had carried him into the room, the certainty that he held the leverage, that his quiet wife was a woman of modest means who'd take whatever he handed her, drained out of his face like color out of a photo left too long in a window. 300. He stopped. He swallowed. 340 million. Sloane looked at him. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The silence he'd spent 7 years reading as emptiness was showing itself, finally, for what it had always been. The stillness of a woman who'd never needed an audience to know what she was worth. Given the documented misconduct, Delphine went on, the unauthorized transfer, the changed beneficiary, the secret consultations, we'll be seeking an unequal division and full recovery of what's been moved, plus costs. Carmichael's exposure, conservatively, is north of $160,000. Gordon Pruitt set down his pen and turned to his client with the specific exhaustion of a lawyer who has just realized he was lied to about everything that mattered. Spencer, he said quietly, we need a minute. Spencer didn't move. He was still looking at Sloane, searching her face for a crack, for some sign of the woman he thought he'd married. The soft one, the easy one, the one who didn't fight. He found nothing. Her hands were folded. The gold band caught the light off the harbor. You knew, he said. His voice had gone rough. This whole time. You knew everything. Sloane held his eyes for a moment. When she spoke, it was in the same voice she'd used for 7 years, calm, unhurried. I knew everything, Spencer. I knew about Camille. I knew about the money. I knew about the lawyer and the insurance. I knew about every dinner and every hotel and every lie you told me, while I made your breakfast and paid your bills and ran your entire life. She paused. My father knew before I did, and he spent the last year of his life making sure that when you finally showed me who you were, you wouldn't be able to take a single thing that was mine. His hands lay flat on the table. His knuckles had gone white. You brought her to his funeral, Sloane said. You held her hand in front of his casket. You looked at me and you thought you were watching me come apart. She stood and picked up her bag. You were watching me finish. She walked to the door. Delphine gathered the documents and followed. At the threshold, Sloane stopped, but she didn't turn around. The locks change Friday, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent room. Your things will be boxed and delivered wherever you tell Ms. Aubrey's office to send them. The joint accounts are frozen until the recovery's settled. She opened the door. Goodbye, Spencer. It closed behind her, and the room stayed silent, and the harbor went on glittering beyond the glass, gray and indifferent and vast. After that, his life came apart in the orderly way a structure comes apart, once you take out the thing that was holding it up. The house went first. Formal notice that the property on Crescent Road belonged to the trust, and that his right to be there had ended. His belongings arrived at Camille's condo, in a stack of cardboard boxes, the moving company's fee charged to his own card. Then the firm. His employer ran a routine compliance review, triggered by the divorce filing, which required him to disclose any pending legal action. And the recovery claim landed in that disclosure, like a stone through ice. A 9-minute meeting with his managing director ended with Spencer walking out without his security pass, on leave, pending an internal look at his conduct. Then the money. The accounts frozen, the $71,000 flagged, his brokerage locked under an order, his credit cards starting to decline at the exact restaurants where the host used to know his name. Then Camille. She had fallen for a complete package. The suits, the confidence, the dinners, the condo he'd described as his that turned out to be Sloane's, the career he narrated so convincingly she'd never thought to check it. Without the house, without the income, without the standing, without the invisible machinery, a woman he'd thrown away had run for 7 years. Spencer was a man on leave living in his girlfriend's one-bedroom with a stack of boxes and a legal bill that grew every week. Camille did the math. She was 29 and pregnant, and she had options. And the man sitting on her couch at 2 in the afternoon, watching the markets, with the hollow look of someone whose bluff had been called, was not the option she'd thought she was choosing. She told him on a Thursday. No fight, no scene. She just said she thought they wanted different things, and that she wished him well, and that he should probably find somewhere else to be by the weekend. He sat in his car in her parking garage for half an hour. No house, no job, no wife, no money he could reach, no name left to trade on. Every surface his life had rested on for 7 years had been quietly pulled out from under him. And beneath those surfaces there was nothing. And there had never been anything. Because the substance had always belonged to someone he'd never once bothered to see. 8 months after the divorce was final, Sloane Devereux stepped all the way into the life she'd spent 7 years folding small. She took her father's seat on the board of the Devereux Foundation and widened its work from literacy into housing, food security, and education funding for single mothers, committing $40 million of her own over 5 years. She hired a team. She built programs. She ran it the way she'd run a household. Quietly, exactly, completely. Except the household was now a foundation reaching 12,000 people from Windsor to St. John's. The Globe and Mail profiled her in February. The Devereux hair no one saw. The piece traced her years of anonymity, the Subaru, the literacy program, the choice to live without the name. It didn't mention Spencer. It didn't have to. Everyone who'd known them both understood what it wasn't saying. The foundation's gala was in April. 600 people in a downtown ballroom. Sloane stood at the podium in a navy gown with a gold band on her finger and spoke for 11 minutes about invisible work and the women who do it. She didn't raise her voice once. The room was silent the whole way through. 3 outlets covered it, and a photograph from that night. Sloane at the podium, calm and lit from within, went up on a digital billboard in the financial district. 2 weeks later, part of the foundation's spring campaign. Spencer saw it on a Wednesday. He was on his way to an interview at a firm a fraction the size of the one that had let him go, in a suit that needed pressing, carrying a resume he'd rewritten 4 times. He looked up at the corner of Bay and King, and there was his ex-wife, 3 stories tall, looking out over the city, with an expression he had never once seen in 7 years of marriage. Certainty. He stood on the sidewalk and looked at it for a long time while people moved around him and the streetcars went by. And he understood, finally standing there in a wrinkled suit with a briefcase full of nothing, that he'd spent 7 years living inside something built by a person he never bothered to learn. He'd taken her stillness for emptiness. He'd taken her patience for weakness. He'd been wrong about all of it, and the wrongness hadn't been one mistake. It had been the whole shape of his life, built on contempt for the very person who was holding it up. The light changed. He crossed. The billboard slid out of view behind him, and he kept walking toward a job that would pay less than half what he'd thrown away. And he took it, because every choice he had left had already been made for him. On a Sunday in June, 9 months after the divorce, Sloane sat on the dock of a cottage in Muskoka. Her father had bought 30 years earlier and never sold, small, cedar-shingled, ringed by birch and pine, and the kind of quiet that isn't empty but full. The lake lay flat and bright. A loon called somewhere across the water and another answered. The gold band caught the early sun. Her phone sat beside her on the weathered boards. On it was the file she'd kept for 2 years. Every statement, every receipt, every screenshot. The entire record of her husband's betrayal, gathered with the care of a woman whose father had taught her that evidence isn't paranoia. It's a kind of inheritance. She opened it. She scrolled through it once. Slowly, the way you walk through a house you've already moved out of, checking each room a final time. Not because you've forgotten something, but to be sure there's nothing left worth carrying. Then she selected the whole thing and deleted it. The phone asked if she was sure. She was. The screen went clean. Not because she'd forgiven him. Forgiveness wasn't really the point. She deleted it because it had done its work. It had armed her, protected her, walked her into that glass room, and let her end a marriage on her own terms. Carrying it any further would only mean carrying him. And she was finished carrying anyone who hadn't earned the weight. She set the phone face down and picked up her coffee and watched the loons drift apart across the bright water. And she thought about her father and the thing he'd told her in a bar she couldn't picture anymore. That the right person never makes you apologize for being still. She hadn't found that person yet. Maybe she would. Maybe she wouldn't. But she'd found something he hadn't promised her, something he must have hoped she'd come to on her own. That quiet was never the same as absence. That a woman who runs everything without ever once being thanked for it isn't weak for doing it. She's just working at a frequency most people never learn to hear. Spencer hadn't heard it. His colleagues hadn't. Camille hadn't. They'd all looked at a quiet woman and decided quiet meant small, looked at her patience and called it surrender, looked at how easily she went unnoticed and assumed there was nothing there to notice. They'd been wrong, and being wrong had cost them everything. She finished her coffee. She stood and walked up the dock toward the cottage with the boards warm under her bare feet. And she felt the specific, clean weight of a woman who has stopped making herself small for the comfort of people who never deserved her full height. Not angry anymore, anger having done its job and gone. Not even sad, only whole. She'd built something in silence for 7 years, and when the silence finally broke, what came out of it wasn't wreckage. It was her. The still ones aren't empty. They're full to the brim. So full they've no need to make noise to prove it. And when the world finally sees them clearly, it isn't because they changed. It's because everyone else, at last, learned how to look.